I didn't have this one on my 2025 bingo card. I mean, Moondrop does every once in a while do something a little bit strange. They'll throw curveballs, give us a weird product that doesn't usually work out that well, in my opinion, but this is the best Moondrop curveball in a really long time. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Moondrop Old Fashioned headphone. It is an on-ear, open-back, budget headphone, very much in the vein of Koss's budget line of headphones. If you're familiar with them, the Koss Porta Pro, the KPH30i, the KSC75, these are headphones that are by now legendary because, well, they're all under $50 and they sound surprisingly good. Not just like surprisingly good for sub $50. They sound better than a lot of stuff that you can buy for $200 plus. So going after them, well, that's a bold move by Moondrop, but that's what we've got here. And it's not just, it's not just the aesthetics. I'll tell you right now that the sound is very similar to the Koss headphones, and even the price is similar to the Koss. I was surprised that this thing's actually available at just 25 US dollars. But does it actually compete with the Koss? Well, for the past couple of days, I've been living with, listening to, and extensively comparing this thing versus my Koss headphones, because I have all the Koss. I am a Koss stan. And I'm ready to let you know what I think. But before we do that, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio, who sent this headphone in for a review. If you want to check it out, of course, I'll have it linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box, build quality, fit, and comfort, all that stuff, before we talk about the sound of this headphone and how it compares directly with those Koss headphones. Because like I said, I've got them all in hand and we're going to talk about them. But for starters, here you go. Here is the packaging. It says Old Fashioned on the front, and then here on the back, look at that. We've got a frequency response graph, which is a good sign. Not only do you want to see a frequency response graph on the back of a box, that's something I always enjoy seeing, but this is a good looking frequency response graph. But we'll see how it graphed on my rig in a little bit. But apart from that, you do get, well, the headphone and the cable and nothing else. And for 25 bucks, I'm not mad about that. Now, you might have noticed I said that the headphone and the cable were separate things because unlike the Koss headphones, the cable here on the Old Fashioned is actually removable. It is a 2-pin cable, and I'll warn that's a little bit on the firm side, but there you go. You see it is a standard 2-pin cable that just plugs into the left and right sides, which means that unlike the Koss stuff, it is going to be eminently easy to replace the cable on your Old Fashioned. Kind of. The caveat here is that in order to put a 2-pin cable on here, you're gonna want a cable that doesn't have ear hooks. And most 2-pin cables on the market are going to have ear hooks. So while it is certainly possible to replace the cable on this, and maybe Moondrop will even sell alternatives that don't have ear hooks on them, it might be a little bit harder than you might think otherwise, just given that, it is a replaceable cable, but it's not the most common format for a replaceable cable. Nonetheless, I'll say that I actually kind of like this cable. It is, as you can probably see, pretty thin, pretty plasticky, and maybe even a little bit stiff and springy, but I actually don't hate it. Those are words I would normally not, those are not great words for me to describe a cable. And if this was on like a $300 headphone, I wouldn't love this necessarily, but the behavior on it is actually not bad. It's maybe a little bit bouncy, a little bit springy, and because of that, maybe it can even be a little bit microphonic. But as you can see, it rotary wraps fine, it straightens out fine, doesn't seem to be particularly memory prone. And I don't know, I kind of dig it. I'm actually kind of curious to try this on some IEMs that I have because IEMs use 2-pin cables. The only thing that's missing from this that won't maybe work so well for IEMs is there's no chin slider. It's a little bit of a bummer, but you can add that yourself. Apart from that, I don't know, not much else to talk about except that it does terminate into a standard 3.5 mil termination. I think there is also an option to buy it in 4.4. Don't quote me on that. I guess you can check the link, but yeah, it's not a swappable termination, I guess is what I was saying. But for 25 bucks, maybe you shouldn't expect that. Now, the rest of the build quality of this headphone is kind of also what you should expect for a $25 headphone. It is not particularly premium feeling. It's very lightweight, very minimal feeling, even maybe a little bit flimsy feeling, but I kind of don't hate it. Like, it's all executed pretty well. I think aesthetically it looks really nice. In fact, I think it looks kind of nicer than most of the Koss stuff. It's just got a nice modern look. Maybe I don't love this print here on the outside. I could do without that. But apart from that, you've got clear plastics for the arms and the back of the drivers. And then you've got a steel metal band here going all around the perimeter of it. And generally a pretty basic, but pretty nice build. Now, Something to call out real quick is these ear pads. So if you're familiar with like the Koss headphones, they're very moddable. People love to mod Koss headphones, and there's, you know, a lot of aftermarket parts. You can buy like pads from Yaxi pads, put them on your Koss headphones. Something that's kind of nice about this old-fashioned headphone is it is compatible with all of those Koss ear pads. You can see I can remove the ear pad just the same as you would with a Koss ear pad, and then you could put it on a Yaxi pad like so. In fact, I've got some other Yaxi pads, or I've got some Yaxi pads that I have put on this thing, so I can confirm that they fit and they match no problem whatsoever. And that's pretty cool. The stock pads here are a little bit thicker than your average stock pad for a Porta Pro, but they're actually pretty similar to Yaxi pads. So generally a pretty nice pad. It's a little bit softer than some other foam pads, although it kind of has a very similar texture to what you would feel on the Porta Pro. But yeah, generally nice pads. I guess we'll talk about fit and comfort in a bit. But the last thing I guess I'll highlight as we're talking about like the moddability of this headphone is that Moondrop seems to have aspirations that there's going to be a modding community for the Old Fashioned. And to support that, the ear cups actually pop off of the headband here. You can see that the headband has kind of like this little ball, and then there's like a socket on the back of the driver. So ostensibly, you could design and 3D print up some other alternative designs. That's, I think, what Moondrop is hoping for. Let's see if I can pop this together without breaking it. And that's actually kind of a similar mechanism to what you get on the Koss headphones. But I do this just to highlight one thing, is that this is not the exact same mechanism that's used on the Koss headphones. In fact, it's kind of like the opposite in terms of like where the ball in the socket is. So this will not work with a Koss headband and vice versa. You can't put Koss drivers onto this headband. Maybe a bit of a missed opportunity, but I don't know. It's good enough as its own headphone. So, okay, now we can talk about fit and comfort. But before I throw it on my head, I did want to highlight one thing. So the way that these things mount, I just kind of highlighted that ball and socket, gives these things kind of like full rotational adjustability here, right? Kind of up, down, left, right, and full 360 directions. But I will say that I find that it's a little bit on the stiff side. Like it wants to fight you a little bit. And because there's not a whole lot of clamp pressure on this headphone, it actually ended up not fitting flat against my ears initially. But as you can probably see that it is fitting pretty flat against my ears now because, well, I highlighted that this is a steel band headband, and that means that it's actually pretty moldable. So I've actually got the headband at 100% max size, which I didn't have to do out of the box. Out of the box, it was maybe like somewhere in the middle of the headband extension is where it fit my head. But because I ended up kind of like flattening it out up here and then bending it in down here to try and get it more of a flat angle once it was reaching my ears, it kind of used up some of the length of the headband. So now I'm using it basically at 100% max size, just to give you an idea. If your head is bigger than mine, there's a good chance this headphone might not fit you very well. But if your head is smaller than mine, it probably will fit you pretty well. So to give you an idea, I guess my head is, I would say, medium large. Not particularly large, but also maybe a little bit larger than average. So there you go. Anything else to talk about it? I guess, look, as we're talking about comfort, an on-ear headphone is going to be kind of inherently limited, just because, well, most over-ear headphones, right? The ear cup goes around your ear because it's not that comfortable to have something pushing into the side of your ear, even if it is completely covered in foam here. And this is true of all the Koss headphones as well, which again have attained legendary status, but yeah, the clamp will eventually wear on your ears. And I don't know, I found myself yesterday, I was doing a pink noise session, a live stream on our Discord server, which, by the way, if you want to join those, join me on Discord, linked in the description. But I was doing that for a couple of hours yesterday. Near the end of the stream, yeah, I was definitely feeling this on my ears, but also, it just meant that I was coming up here, relieving my ear a little bit, and then settling it back down. And I don't know, I was able to make it through a couple hours with these headphones. Yeah, I don't know. Anything else to talk about it? I mean, it's a very lightweight budget headphone. You're definitely not going to feel the weight on your head. And it's also very open. Yeah, just, again, I mentioned that it was an open back. If you've never worn an open back headphone before, I am comfortably talking to you with these things on top of my ears. I could have a conversation with somebody with these on top of my ears. If I was riding a bus, I'd probably be hearing all of the bus noises, and people around me might be hearing my music if I was listening really loud. So just note that it is an open back headphone, and that comes with open back things, but also has some implications for the sound, which I guess is what we can talk about next. So as far as the frequency response of the Moondrop Old Fashioned, this is what I graphed on my rig. Actually very, very similar to what I saw on the Moondrop graph. And generally this is a pretty nice frequency response, especially given what we're looking at right here. Again, a $25 headphone that doesn't even have like much room for tuning. Like it's just driver plus cushion right on your ear. And this dotted gray line back here, this is roughly what, you know, neutral sounds like. And as you can see, okay, if you ignore the severe bass roll off, which we'll talk about, we're looking at a pretty clean looking mid-range and a really actually pretty safe treble execution. I would say that the overall sound signature on the Old Fashioned is definitely a mid-range forward sound signature, okay? There is severe bass roll off on this headphone, as there is with all the Koss headphones as well. So this is definitely not gonna be a bassy headphone. And in fact, we'll talk about how it lines up with all the other Koss headphones in a bit. But definitely think of this as a mid-range forward sound that has, again, like a nice, actually pretty tame, well-balanced treble presentation. Overall, because of the lack of bass and the mid-range forwardness, it does have kind of a brighter tilt to the sound signature. It's not gonna be like an aggressive, tinkling, sparkly bright type of sound signature. It's just bright in that there's just not a lot of warmth and a lot of low end to the bottom end. It's a little bit on the thin sounding side in terms of sound signature, but I gotta say, I think it sounds pretty good. Actually surprisingly good. I expected this to sound about on par with like let's just say like the earbuds that Moondrop has been releasing over the past year or so, which I did not like. And this one, I like. I enjoy listening to it. Does it sound like, is it like the last word in definition and resolution? Absolutely not. But that's not, you know, what you should expect for 25 bucks. As an alternative to Koss headphones, I feel like it's in the game. Again, we'll talk about how it compares exactly to them, but it is kind of on par in terms of like the spatial effects that you get. Again, like if you're not used to an open back headphone, maybe you've never experienced that before. And this is a nice little introduction to that. Like it's got a more spacious sound. Look, I like this better than frankly most closed back headphones. Let me just put it that way. There are very few closed back headphones that I would rather listen to than the Moondrop Old Fashioned, no matter how much you spend. So that's saying a lot for it. But yeah, it's just really pretty pleasant. I will say, in terms of like demerits, where it's, you know, it's definitely not a perfect headphone. The bass texture is kind of non-existent. Like I highlighted with the frequency response, there's just a lot of roll off, not a lot of sub bass. And because of that, there's just not much definition. You will get a little bit of a punch from kick drums, but it's pretty light in the bass. Also, I'll say that there's kind of an excessive peak around like 3 kilohertz. Some people might experience that as shout. I still don't know what people mean by shout, but for me, I experience it as kind of like a scratchiness to the timbre of vocals and stuff like that. So again, it's definitely not a perfect sounding headphone, but I'll say that it sounds better than I expected of a $25 headphone, which is, again, kind of why Koss got so popular, is that they sound just so much better than you expect, and they don't cost a ton. So let me bring in those other Koss headphones for a direct comparison. Here we've got, of course, the Koss Porta Pro, the venerable Koss Porta Pro. This is at its minimum size. This is at its maximum size, just to give you an idea of how it compares with this one. We've got also the Koss KPH30i. I think this one is underrated, by the way. Also a really good budget Koss headphone. Of course, we've got the Koss KSC75, the classic. This is the cheapest of the bunch. You can get this for like 15 bucks, kind of all the time. And then finally over here, we've got the Koss KPH40, which I've actually got on, actually, I guess technically this is a retrospect headband with a Porta Pro driver and Yaxi pads, which is almost like really has nothing to do with the KPH40, except it's basically the same. But anyway, in terms of sound signature and like how I wanted to compare these things, there's kind of like a spectrum of the brightest sound to the warmest sound. And I feel like this is just a good way to understand and contextualize where the Old Fashioned fits into it, right? A brighter sound is going to be more treble focused, a little bit more open and airy sounding, whereas the warmer sound is going to be more bassy, more thick, and kind of maybe even a little bit on the muddy side. And that's kind of our spectrum that we're looking at. And I feel like Koss covers that entire spectrum. So let's talk about that. I mean, on the far bright side is gonna be the Koss KSC75. This is the brightest headphone of all that the Koss does. Not a whole lot of bass. That's not why people love it, but people love it for its nice forward vocal presentation and just a nice open, airy sound. The Porta Pro is gonna be on the opposite end of that spectrum. It is the bassiest, darkest, kind of almost muddy, but it's just definitely on the congested side in terms of its sound signature, but it's still pretty satisfying, especially if you're looking for bass and not expecting bass out of a headphone that looks like this. The KPH30, I would say that it kind of fits closer to the Porta Pro, but it's not quite as bassy and not quite as warm and not quite as soupy sounding. The KPH30 still definitely has like a warm tilt to the sound signature. Has a little bit of a fuzziness to the sound because I think the treble is a little bit on the muted side, but it is definitely going to be a little bit more open sounding than the Porta Pro. And then in between, I would say here's where I'd put my my KPH40. I think the stock KPH40 is actually probably pretty close to the Porta Pro, but because I've got Yaxi pads on it, it actually brightens up the sound signature a little bit. And I would say it's actually closer to the KSC75. So this is kind of my spectrum of brightest to warmest. And where the Moondrop Old Fashioned fits in is, I would actually say, kind of like right here. It's not quite as bright as the Koss KSC75, but it's definitely not as boomy and bassy as the Porta Pro. Definitely also not as thick as the KPH30i. And then versus my KPH40 Porta Pro Yaxi pad monstrosity here, it's actually pretty similar. But I do feel like the bass comes through a little bit better for me on this, partly because of, I think it fits, it just couples to my ear a little bit better. And because of that, I get a better seal as far as we're talking about with these headphones. But I would say in terms of just the tonal balance, like these are both pretty similar. As far as like my absolute preference though, when it comes to listening to them, I'll be honest, as much as I enjoy the Old Fashioned, I feel like the Koss still has kind of an advantage. And maybe this is just my nostalgia coming into play, but I feel like it's just more satisfying. I think a lot of it comes down to that 3 kilohertz crunch that I was talking about. It just adds a little bit of a scratchiness to the timbre here, whereas the Koss stuff just comes across a little bit smoother. And I feel like it still stands out to me. But if you want something that has all the benefits of the Koss stuff, plus a replaceable cable, and infinite modability, and frankly, a really competitive price, the Moondrop Old Fashioned really does surprise me. So out of 5 stars, I'm gonna give this thing a very solid 4 stars. Again, if you wanna check this thing out, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, well, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me in Discord, like I mentioned in the description, and I'll catch you on the next super reveal. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's begin with the theory.